I thought you were withholding your services.
Fortunately for these patients, I am programmed with the Hippocratic Oath. It requires me to treat anyone who's ill.
One of the more interesting things about Voyager is the duality that it presents. In my opinion, Star Trek Voyager is one of the weaker series in the entire franchise, and that includes Discovery-era Trek. However, when we look at individual episodes, it has some of the most compelling storylines as well as the most Trek-ish themes. One of these famed episodes would have to be Critical Care, but not necessarily for the reasons you think. After rewatching the episode, I personally found it to be one that was very, very layered, both with an obvious message that is worth looking into and a more subtle one. Let's just get into it.
The leg injury isn't all I'm picking up. He's got some kind of systemic disease.
It's a chromal viral infection. We have 12 cases down here. He's in the final stage.
Is there an established treatment?
Cytoglobin injections.
These scans don't show any cytoglobin in his bloodstream.
He hasn't been given any.
Why not?
He doesn't have a high enough TC.
So, let's get the most obvious messaging out of the way. For those who haven't seen it, the Doctor is captured by a thief and sold to a health facility. This facility takes what limited resources that are available and distributes them among the populace. The denizens of this world pay a third party to provide medical care, and ultimately, the third party gets to decide who lives and who dies.
Why are these patients getting preferential treatment?
They have a higher TC than the others.
Indulge me. What's TC?
Treatment coefficient. The allocator assigns one to every patient. It determines the level of care they receive.
The way medicine is distributed here, it's obvious that the poor are the have-nots and are left to rot, while the wealthy, or in this case the most useful, are given luxurious accommodations. If there is one weak point in the episode, I would have to say it's the mustache twirling that we see, but we'll come back to that. The Doctor is basically forced to give top-tier care to people that arguably don't need it. So, before I get too far into it, let's analyze that for a second. I'll go ahead and say it at the top. The way the medicine is being doled out is aberrant. It goes against most everything a doctor should do, and the medicine should be redistributed in a different way. That said,
An agricultural engineer is obviously more important than a waste processor.
Important to whom?
Society.
the logic behind it isn't insane. If you have two people with the need of the same treatment and only one treatment is available, then you have to start making some decisions. This is called triage, and it's done quite often. If two people are equally matched and both have the same chances of living once given the medicine, then you either have to flip a coin or start choosing based on other qualities, like impact to society. This, in my opinion, is perhaps the one major failing of the show. Instead of having it basically be obvious what should be happening, add some moral ambiguity where those who are receiving the better care desperately need the medicine as well. We didn't go that way here. We showed people who were healthy and those who would die in like 6 minutes if they didn't get it. Obviously, one deserves to get it more than the other. Though I will say, adding 40% life expectancy isn't insubstantial. But let's go one step further.
Don't you have any ethical standards?
You are hardly in a position to speak to me of ethics. Lying, stealing, any other crimes you wish to confess?
I was trying to save lives.
And I am trying to save a society. Do you really think patient R12 is going to help me do that?
His name was Tebis.
He wasn't contributing, he was a drain on resources.
I'm sorry he's sick. But our society is much better off since we began following the allocator's protocols.
The problem about this situation, beyond the massive Prime Directive violation both during his work and especially how he enacted change at the end, is that we don't know what's going on the planet. They continue to say that they don't have enough medicine and they have to focus on those whom add to society versus those who don't. What if we are dealing with a culture that quite literally has had significant brain drain, where those whom can't do the managerial work that needs to be done are so low in number that life extension and executive care is required in order for the society to survive? Hear me out. It seems callous that a woman who is running an agricultural business is chosen over someone who seems to have a predilection towards medicine, but hasn't contributed yet. Again, it's cold because he hasn't been given the opportunity, but what if he is the exception and not the norm? Say the planet was being impacted by some form of disease that is so rampant that it is devastating the society, and that this culture itself is barely holding on from becoming an extinct race. This society is prioritizing its best and brightest while using the lower and middle class to sustain the situation, because with the disease, they don't have the resources to adequately educate those they need to. An entire class is chosen to be the leaders while everyone else is placed into a different kind of caste system or are just workers. Not because anyone wants it this way, but because by the time they educate the populace the way they need to, it'd be too late. The agricultural sector would fall due to lack of workers and everyone would die. Now, is this the case? That's likely not what the writers were going for, but it is, at least in my opinion, an interesting dilemma to what we're presented with here.
Level Blue's total medication requests were down by 6%.
Because our cure rate was higher.
Exactly. Because you performed so efficiently last month, the allocator will determine you're able to do with less next month. If we don't order more medication now, we may not get it when we need it.
Are we having a problem with our newest piece of technology?
Actually, he seems to be learning the system quite well.
Overall, it is pretty black and white, and I really enjoy how the Doctor works around the rules to help those he can. Importantly, he also never takes away from those already receiving the care in which they were given, which is a nice touch. Note, even though some are being over-medicated, he never takes that medicine, he just finds a way to order more. In this way, he even convinces the head doctor that by ordering more, it will ensure a stable supply of medicine that will continue. Supply and demand. Wow, watch out, Voyager, that's kind of capitalist of you. However, this wouldn't be Lore Reloaded if I didn't take it a bridge too far, so let's look at the question behind the question. Before we do that, though, there's something really important to tell you. This video is brought to you by NordVPN. Nah, I'm just kidding. But hey, if you like this video and want to see more Lore Reloaded, please consider joining my Patreon at patreon.com/Lore Reloaded. While I will say that there are perks for joining my Patreon, there are multiple people that will speak to the fact that I'm really bad about providing those perks. It is something I want to try to work on. I've always had an issue with it, and I'm actually going to dedicate some time every day to getting those perks out. But honestly, if you're joining my Patreon, it's because you want to see more of these videos and you want to support the channel. So go into it knowing that. Anyway, that out of the way, let's get back into it.
You stole it? I prefer to think of it as reallocation. We're going to treat every chromovirus patient on this level.
Do you have any idea what kind of trouble we could get into?
We? Then you will help me.
No, absolutely not. Modifying data files was bad enough.
Well, I certainly wouldn't want you to do anything to compromise your ethics.
One of the things that captivated me on my rewatch of Critical Care is that I could also see parallels to not only distribution of medicine or wealth, but how actual tribal nature in our culture works. An interesting piece of the entire episode is the acceptance that is given to all levels. Whether you're on a level that barely gets any resources, or you're at the very top getting the best of the best, everyone just accepts it. Everyone thinks that this is the way that it has to be. They truly think that those with more value deserve their spot, and that to question that invites division. In fact, when the Doctor begins to push back and question the way things are done, and help those who need it, he is fought. At all levels. These are people who initially refuse to assist him, even if they agree with what he's saying. After all, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, even if the focus is on the few, somehow. I cannot understate how this meta-commentary, even if it was never meant to be such, is so apt to today's way of thinking. Regardless of what you believe, there are people within a hierarchy that are proponents of one ideology or another. You can look no further than the Star Trek fandom to see what I'm talking about. And within these hierarchies, these tribes, you have people that will be moderates, largely agreeing with one side or the other, but not discounting the other because there can be some validity. But due to the way our society is, they're not willing to point out when one side is right over the other. There are people that will largely stay quiet regardless of their actual beliefs. And again, I suppose this is one of the major strengths of Voyager. While as a work taken in its entirety, it's very weak, there are episodes of just absolute greatness. It is also telling that when the Doctor, after being tired of everything that has happened and neither side willing to help, takes matters into his own hands and breaks his morals. Again, I know many will say I'm reading too much into this, and that's possible, but it still makes you think.
Patient R12, species Denal, identity Tebis.
This is ridiculous. I'm not Tebis.
Now, why don't we see if we can get your condition treated? Requesting one cytoglobin injection for patient R12.
Treatment denied.
I order you to medicate me now.
Ordinarily, I would. But if the allocator says no,
Lastly, let's analyze the doctor's final decision, the betrayal of all of his values. I won't go too far into it, but this is, quite obviously, a huge Prime Directive violation that is never analyzed. And I'm not just talking about when he's treating those people when he probably shouldn't. Though maybe we can argue him helping others as a part of the Hippocratic Oath that provides some form of protection, that would make sense. So maybe it would be okay for him to help treat others, but his actions do directly impact and change the future of an entire civilization. At least we're led to believe that it does. The doctor's actions here to infect someone and force them to change their mind, at least by the standards set forth by TNG and Voyager, are questionable. There is very little room given the interpretation of TNG's Picard and Voyager's Janeway. That said, did he make the right choice? By forcing the hand of the administrator, it is true that supplies will become far more limited. We are led to believe that medicine is very sparse, even if we don't see it. Kind of like Voyager never has power, but it somehow doesn't have an issue going here and there, and the lack of power would mean they'd have to ration more, yet somehow the cast gains weight and goes on holodeck adventures every other episode, but nevertheless, let's just take it at face value. I believe that this decision may have been somewhat ill-advised. Ultimately, the increase in use of medicine will begin to drain resources. Did they go too far in rationing and create a caste system? From everything we see, yes, but that doesn't mean that if they treat everyone, they won't end up back where they were. So again, did the doctor make the right decision? Maybe, maybe not. It's not as black and white as I think the show would like you to think. But what about the moral dilemma? He ultimately made a patient sick, blackmailed him, and forced him to change his stance. This goes against the Hippocratic Oath, it goes against his programming, and it betrays his uniform. And it's ultimately one of the most Starfleet things I've seen him do. It is absolutely the spirit of Trek and what really all of this is about. One of the problems with my detractors, beyond being terminally online and largely terminally radical left, is that they can't see Trek for what it is. Not really. Trek isn't about this grand utopia where everyone is gay, bisexual, and gives their pronouns. At least not fully. It's about becoming more than the sum of your parts, even if what is the sum of your parts isn't completely Starfleet, or dare I say, the Star Trek ideal. In that moment, he did arguably the wrong actions for the right reasons. He wanted to make the universe a better place, and the core tenets of who he was were changed after being challenged. Personally, having basically studied Star Trek for more than 3 years now, I'm a different person because of this art form. It taught me a lot about what it means to question your core beliefs, and not just to go with one side or the other. And that's what happened with the Doctor. As I've stated a couple of times, was it the right choice? I think you could argue both sides. But was it something very Trek and something a Starfleet officer would do? I believe yes. But these are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.
while I was aboard that ship, I poisoned a man.
Deliberately.
Yes. I was trying to force him to let me treat patients who were dying.
You were prepared to sacrifice an individual to benefit a collective. You were hoping your behavior was the result of a malfunction. I'm sorry, Doctor, but I must give you a clean bill of health.
Computer, end medical holographic program.
Holy shit. He's dead. What the fuck?